Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. Appreciate everyone joining us. We have a special guest today from the League of Women Voters, Diane Fisher. Hey, Diane. Thanks for joining
Hi,
me.
nice to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a good educational podcast. We're going to be discussing how to be a prepared voter and everything that comes with that for 2024 and municipal elections. But before we get to that, I just want to thank our sponsors, Clearway Fiber, our corporate sponsor. They're an internet providing business here in Peachtree Corners, serving over 1,000 businesses in Peachtree Corners. They're actually based in the Southeast, and they provide better than what you would expect from a cable provider. Fast internet connection, great support, especially to businesses and residents. So check them out, Clearway Fiber. Also check out EV Remodeling Inc. Eli, who's the owner of the company, him and his family live here in Peachtree Corners. It's a great business. They do from design to build, renovation work, um, lots of good activity out there, lots of good references for them. So check them out, evremodelinginc.com, and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about us, two supporters that way. So let's get right into the show. Diane, I appreciate you joining us. League of Women Voters, it's been around for quite a while. Um, you are the Gwinnett chapter of the organization? Is that
Correct. We are the Gwinnett chapter. The national organization has been around since 1920,
mhm,
founded out of the movement for women's suffrage.
yeah.
And we in Gwinnett, in this iteration, have been around since 2019. Um,
Yeah,
Comes and
okay,
goes, and so it
okay.
is relatively new coming back, and so that's where we are now.
Excellent. So I met you at the Peachtree Corners Festival, which is part of what you all do, outreach to the community. And you were out there, I think at the time when I passed, you were registering a new voter that came
Indeed.
on,
Hmm.
and she was asking questions. So similar to what we're going to do here, we want to know a little bit about how, if you're a new voter and you haven't voted yet, or if you just moved to the state of Georgia and you have to register here to vote, because obviously from where someone comes from, you have to register in the state that you're going to be voting in, at the residence that you're going to be voting in. So tell us a little bit about what would be needed for someone to register new here in the state of Georgia in Gwinnett County.
Sure. So in Georgia, we have automatic voter registration through the DDS, through driver services. And so when anyone gets a new license or changes an address on a license or does anything with DDS, they
Hmm.
actually are automatically registered to vote. So that we actually have very high voter registration in Georgia because of that. What doesn't happen though is sometimes people move. Sometimes
Right.
people, move down the street. Sometimes they move across town. Sometimes they move within a county. Sometimes they move out of the county. And you do, as you mentioned, need to be registered to vote at your current address. And so it's important for everyone to make sure that they take care of making sure that that happens, because sometimes people don't always update a license in a timely fashion, but they
Sure.
actually
Sure.
move. And the reason why it's linked to where you live is because who you vote for is determined by where you live, what precincts. And so it is important that you are registered at your current address. So you can always check. One of the best resources for checking the
Hmm.
status of your registration is the Secretary of State has their website, which is mvp.sos.ga.gov. And if you put in your name and birth date and county, you can find out where you're registered to, if you're registered, where you're
Right.
registered, what precincts you vote for, where
Right.
you vote. All of that information is available on that site. And so we encourage every voter before every election to check the status of their registration to make sure that everything is, above board, that it's
Yeah.
where you need it to be, and that nothing happened, because there is a list maintenance that happens as a regular part of the process, and
Sure.
sometimes people are moved to inactive status if they miss a notice or something like that. So we just always want to make
Yeah.
sure that everybody checks their status.
Which makes sense. I just did that for two of my kids. I showed them how to do it because they hadn't voted since they hadn't voted. So I think one of them in the decade maybe voted once. And I said, there's maintenance. They could purge you from the list. And they were still
Right.
on the list. So it was
Right. So
helpful.
if you
Yeah.
don't vote in two federal election cycles,
Right.
then you are moved to inactive status, and
Mhm.
that starts a process of eventually dropping you
Yeah.
off the roll. So you're not obligated to vote in elections, but obviously we encourage everyone to vote.
Hmm.
Um, but
Sure.
but it is important to respond to those kinds of requests that you get, because they probably did get some kind of notice in the mail indicating that they were questioning if they are still at the address that they were
Right.
registered
Right. No doubt. And I think younger people have, I don't know if they have a bit more of a problem following that up because it's not on their to-do list. I mean, obviously, I think the demographics show that older people vote more regularly, younger people less regularly, unless it's a presidential race. And even still, sometimes it just depends. And COVID hasn't helped either,
at.
right? People moving back home with their parents, whether they moved in from out of state. Maybe they still wanted to vote for, if they were living in New York, maybe they still want to do an absentee ballot uh, back up there, and that's possible. But they wouldn't be able to vote down here, right?
Right, right. You can only be registered to vote in one location.
Right.
And quite honestly, one thing that people don't know is that um, if you register, so say you move, I'll use your example from New York, and you move to Georgia and you register to
Right.
vote in Georgia. There is not a process like an automatic unregistering you from New York. You actually
That's right.
have to request that. My daughter, when she moved out of state, it took us a long time to get her off of the voter rolls here.
Uh-huh. Really?
Because you actually have to request that to happen. Most
Okay.
people do not think that that's something that they have to do. So, and that's why
Hmm.
sometimes the rolls are not updated, or updated. You might show up on a place where you have no intention of voting and never voted because you've
Right.
moved and you just didn't
Sure.
think that you need to do anything about it. So,
Sure. And I think you're right. Most of my friends would not even think about, oh, I need to unregister.
right.
Um, yeah, just
Yeah. Yeah.
that's it to say. I mean, technically, if someone wanted, technically, you could end up doing a mail-in ballot to New York, let's say, and vote here, and no one would know the difference, apparently. Obviously, we don't
Well, so
want that happening,
there
but
have been cases
yeah,
that come before the state election board that come of people being
yeah.
caught doing that, and it
Oh,
is not
yeah.
a pretty situation. So yes,
Right.
that is illegal.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a
uh,
federal offense,
it is
obviously.
a federal
Yes.
offense, and
Yes.
so so
Yeah.
that is certainly not something that we encourage. And most people who register, they move someplace, they register, they
Yeah.
have no intention of
Oh,
voting
of course.
elsewhere.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so
That
but
makes
young
sense.
people particularly, or people who are transient,
Hmm.
it does mean that you have to pay a little bit more attention and make a plan to vote. I think it's also
Yeah.
important to think about, it's not just being registered, it's then knowing when elections are, knowing what your plan will be. Will you vote
Hmm.
absentee? Will you vote early advanced voting? Will you
Right.
vote on election day? What's that plan to make sure that you're actually being able to vote?
So in the state of Georgia, if I'm going on vacation or even not, you don't need an excuse for an absentee ballot. You can ask
Correct.
for that. Correct.
Right.
So you could go online. to one of the sites, or which site to go to get an
So,
absentee
so
ballot?
yes. So that depends on the election.
Oh,
And I will say,
right.
and I only
Right.
raise that because we're coming up on municipal elections here in Gwinnett County, actually statewide, but also specifically here in Peachtree Corners.
Right.
And in Gwinnett, your the county does not run the municipal elections. Every
Right.
city runs their own municipal election. So the answer for coming up for the November 7th election, which will be the municipal election here in Peachtree Corners, is that you need to
Hmm.
request the absentee ballot from the county clerk in Peachtree Corners. And if you go to the website, you can get that information. There's a form on there that you can request the absentee ballot for the Peachtree Corners election.
Right.
Typically, for every other election,
Hmm.
you would go to the county, well, actually, either the Secretary of State's website or the County Board of Elections office,
Hmm.
and you can get the form there. One of the changes that happen in election forms is that you can't register just on an online portal anymore. You have to
Hmm.
print out the application because it has to have a wet signature. It has to actually have an actual signature on it. So you have to
Okay.
print off the form, fill it out, sign it, and then you can send it back digitally. But you can't just. I think there was a time when there was a
Yeah.
portal where you could
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
go on and put in your information and request it. So now you have to print out the form and then return it to the county election
But you
office.
can scan that form, return it
Yes, you
digitally.
can scan it or take a photo of it, and then
Interesting.
email it back to the elections office,
Wow. Okay.
and do it
So
that
they're
way. So
just forcing you to print it out to do that
correct,
wet signature.
right, which
Interesting.
means that you now have to have a print access to a printer, um,
Correct. Right. How many people do that? That's an interesting proposition.
and so on. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so
Yeah.
that is the process now.
Okay.
Um, and but where you go and again, because Gwinnett is unusual, Gwinnett's one of the few counties in Georgia that the municipalities run their own elections.
Right. Yeah.
Most other counties in the area, Fulton, DeKalb, the counties run the municipal elections as well.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
what that means for us here in Gwinnett and in Peachtree Corners is that when you go to vote on election day for the municipal elections, you will not go to your regular location where you normally would are used to voting. So, at Simpson Elementary or at,
Peachtree
any of
Corners
the
Baptist.
churches, Peachtree Corners
Sure.
Baptist Church, or,
Yeah.
any of the different locations where you always go to your regular precinct location. Everybody in Peachtree Corners for the municipal election will vote
Hmm.
at City Hall. Down around in the room around the bottom, the community trust room,
Right.
around the left side of the building. That's
Right.
where elections are held for the county, for the city. I'm sorry.
For the city, and there's one open seat, one open contested seat, I should say,
Right.
contested seat. So.
Every other election cycle, we would have. So in this case, on the ballot is the mayor, post 1, post 3, and post 5. So
Right.
the only contested seat is the post 5. And post 5 is an at-large seat, and so that means that everybody in Peachtree Corners will vote for that seat. Post 1 and 3 are geographically
Hmm.
um, defined.
Right.
So the first 3 posts are based on geography.
Hmm.
So post 1, I think, is the southern
I
section
believe
of,
so.
and
Peachtree
then
Corners. Right.
3 is the sort of the northern part of Peachtree Corners.
Yeah.
So Alex Wright is and Phil Sod are in
Hmm.
those seats, and those are uncontested seats. And then, of course, the mayor's race is also citywide, and that
Right.
is uncontested as
Right.
well.
So so people understand this, come November, um, you're going to have to go to 2 different places to do this. And
No. No, no, no,
John?
no. The only election in
Well, actually, you're
2023
right. Right,
The
right,
only
right,
election in
right.
2023 is the municipal election.
That's right.
There have been times when you've had to go to two places
Yeah.
because there were simultaneous elections, but that is not the case now. So on November 7th, and actually early voting does start for the municipal election on Monday,
Mhm.
October 16th. So Monday through Friday, from October 16th through November 3rd, and then October 21st and October 28th, which are Saturdays,
Mhm.
from 9 to 5 is early voting. So you can go for 3 weeks early voting, including 2 Saturdays,
Right.
and then of course on election day is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. On election day, November 7th, and that will be just at
City
the
Hall.
um, the city hall. If you go to your regular polling location, there won't be anything going on there other than,
Right.
school or
Right.
church or whatever might be happening.
So people should also be aware, I think, when they send in the absentee ballot, how long do they have? How does it get date stamped? Does it, if it arrives 3 days later? I mean, how's that
Sure.
process? Explain that.
So legally, your absentee ballot needs to arrive in this case City Hall
Hmm.
um, by 7 p.m. on election day. If it gets
Okay.
there the next day,
It's not counted.
it's not going to count. It has to arrive. So you need to, if you're if you're going to be voting with an absentee ballot, you need to make sure that you've planned ahead to request it. And I would say request it like today when you hear
Right.
this. Make
Right.
sure you request it, and then as soon as it comes, fill it out. And you can actually, I mean, if you are local and you're just going to be out of town, you can actually just bring it down to City Hall
Mm.
and not even worry about the postal service.
Right.
Obviously, if you're a student who lives out of the area, needs to mail it, again, do all of that like ASAP, because the time
Right.
is a very limited window.
Okay. And if, just because I'm thinking along this line, if someone was going to drop it off, like if I was going to drop off my son's ballot, I could drop that off at City Hall. That's okay.
Yes, you can drop off a ballot for a immediate family relative, so your wife,
Right.
your kids,
Right.
a parent. You can't, though, start collecting from people in your
Right.
neighborhood and
Right.
bringing those in. But you, for
Okay.
close family.
The League of Women Voters is known for providing good, nonpartisan information to get people to to vote, to fulfill their civic responsibilities and all. And we talked a little bit about what it means to be a prepared voter before we started. So tell us a little bit, Diane, what does it mean to be a prepared voter going to 2024 into the presidential race? Election year, where there's going to be a lot on the ballot, I'm sure, in a variety of states, but even here in Georgia.
Sure, because it's not just about the presidential election. There will
Hmm.
be all the congressional seats. There will be all of the Georgia House seats and the Georgia Senate seats. There will be county positions. All of the
Right.
county constitutional positions will be on the ballot. So there will be an awful lot on that ballot. And so being a prepared voter means being an informed voter. So obviously the first is to know like when you need to be voting, and there are lots of
Right.
elections in
Hmm.
2024 starting in March. The presidential preferential primary will be in March.
Right.
Then we've got the regular primaries in May, and then we've got November elections, and then any runoffs that may need to happen as well. So there will be a lot of elections.
Yeah.
So it's not just to go in and vote once and be done with it. So that's one thing, knowing when all those different elections are. The second is knowing who's on the ballot. And
Hmm.
through that MVP site that I mentioned earlier, the mvp.sos.ga.gov,
Mhm.
you can pull up, and it's not available right now, but it will be available for 2024, all of who's on your ballot. You can pull up sample ballots. And so that will be really helpful to know ahead of time, because I hear people all the time saying, like, I got into the polling booth and I had no idea that there were all of those things on the ballot.
Right,
I wasn't
right.
prepared. And so you can be prepared by pulling up the sample ballot and
Mhm.
actually marking, doing your research. And there are lots of different ways to get information. There are candidate forums. Certainly the candidates themselves are out there putting information out there.
Right.
We will, the league is known for doing candidate information forums as well, and we likely will be doing some, particularly for our county races. The
Mhm.
state may be doing some larger scale ones, but here in Gwinnett, the Gwinnett League focuses very much on what's happening here in Gwinnett. And so doing your research in terms of getting information about not only what's on the ballot, but then being able to check out the candidates,
Right.
so that who aligns with your values and with
Right.
the things that are important to you. And so that becomes part of the conversation, that's important to have.
Yeah, I coming from New York, I was involved quite a bit in political politics when I was younger, 18, 20. You see the things that go on, the amount of so doing it for such a long period of time. So, to hear people say I'm not prepared or I don't know who's on the ballot, it gets really frustrating when there is a lot of information out there. Um, Between news outlets, granted, there's a variety of news outlets, so there's some agendas on some of these outlets, but for the most part, you'll be able to get the information out there. Candidates are especially local candidates are doing more door-to-door campaigning. You will get it inundated with mail, right? I mean, last year or the year before, was just ridiculous the amount of mail that was going out. Literally 3 or 4 postcards a day coming in.
And you have
Um,
to be careful about that mail, because it's not
yeah,
just the candidates who are sending out
mhm,
mail now.
that's
It's,
right.
all kinds of organizations, and
Yep,
some of the information is not always accurate, or
right.
it
Yes.
it's political spin. And so I think
Hmm.
if you're looking to find out candidates' positions on
Hmm.
things, that's where it's important to look at various sorts. So the league does run nationally a website called vote411.org,
Okay.
where we do provide we reach out to candidates to get their input on, so that you can hear from them what they believe about certain things. So we ask questions.
Right.
There are other sort of neutral, if you will, sites. Ballotpedia has a, sort of a
Oh
candidate
yeah. Sure.
profile
Sure.
site. So there are ways that you can get sort of just factual information
Hmm.
about candidates, as opposed to, sort of the political spin that can sometimes get make noise about things.
Yes. Yes.
And so we
Yeah.
do encourage, but at the very least, pull up that ballot to say, this is what's going to be on there. So you don't get in and say, oh, I didn't know the the clerk of the
Right.
court. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
I've
those are
seen.
the kinds of things that sort of sneak up on people.
Right. I mean, they're lesser known positions. They get less exposure. People either tend to skip over them or they tend to, depending on the politics, tend to either vote for the incumbent because there's an I next to it, because that seems safer.
Hmm.
Or if they want to stir the pot, they're voting for the other candidate to come in. It's a variety of reasons, right, that people vote.
Right.
And then there's referendums on the ballot. And because they're written in such legalese sometimes, you may be reading it in that moment at the ballot box and not realize really what it's saying. because some
Right.
of it's written in such a way you would think, oh, that's easy. That's what that means. And then you find out later, no, that's not what that meant. So
Right. Or if I vote yes, it's actually voting against
that's
it
right.
because
Yes.
of the way that it's written. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that those referenda and those are available. You'll be able to pull those up on your sample ballot
Hmm.
at the MVP site, so that you can actually see it and read it and,
Hmm.
and do your research. I mean, I know that I sit
Yeah.
down, when my kids were first voting, we would sit down and literally go through the ballot and research candidates, together,
Wow. Okay.
and talk about and the referenda questions, even like talk about what they mean and what the pros and cons, and and if we didn't have an answer, like we disagreed or whatever, like we
Hmm.
talk about it, and sometimes we disagreed and they would vote one way and I would vote a different way. But
Right.
the point being that having that conversation and being informed, because that is how we as citizens are being able to make sure that what we want is actually happening. I mean, you hear so often people saying, like, it doesn't really matter who I vote for, or if I vote, because, people, it just doesn't matter, and my voice doesn't matter. Well, it matters if you do it thoughtfully, and if everybody were to participate, then we're all in a better place.
Right.
Here in Peachtree Corners, just going back, we have
Hmm.
27,000 registered voters, and in the last 6 municipal elections, the most we've ever had is a 10% turnout, so like 2,700 voters. So, when
Yeah.
people are complaining about, whatever they might be complaining about the city, you need to actually vote,
Yeah.
to have your perspective put
Yeah.
forward. And
That's the frustrating part. Yeah, when I read things on Nextdoor and people say, oh, these people, they have an agenda. This is what they want to do, and it's like it doesn't take much. You're right. I mean, sometimes there's more than 2,700 votes, right? There's more than that depending on the year. Now,
in the
really,
last 6 elections,
in
we
Peachtree
never
Corners,
had more than 10% of the voting
that is so
population.
sad. That
After
is
the
so
initial, I think when we first became a city,
right.
that was a higher turnout, but since
Sure,
then, yeah, it's a very small
27.
turnout.
Wow, I
And
didn't
we
realize it was
know
that
that
bad.
there are elections that have been won by 15 votes.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
there are elections that have been won by one vote.
Yeah.
And so,
Yes.
especially in
Yeah.
these smaller elections,
Oh, yeah.
that
Depends on how
it
many.
makes it more important to get out there and have your voice
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah. Especially because in small elections like this, it depends on how many friends you have. And you're right. There was one vote, one election. I think it was the last election that we had, where it was a 14 vote difference,
Right,
or something along those lines.
right.
So that's you. If you want to make change, you have to be involved. You have to knock doors. You can't just send postcards. You have to meet your neighbors, your voters, and figure it out. And then,
And
yeah.
and I will say, I mean, I think candidates these days are very open to,
Hmm.
certainly the local candidates, the county positions, the state house representatives, and so on. I mean, you can go onto their websites and ask for a meeting. They will meet with you,
Oh yeah,
and I think that is important. And it's important to meet with not just the people who you think you might agree with, but also the other side, to hear what they stand for and what they plan on doing.
yeah,
So I think that we are in a time when it is easy to access your candidates, particularly at the more local levels,
yeah.
and go to the events that they're having, or send an email and say, I'd love to talk to you, and will you have
Right,
coffee with me?
right. And
They'll do it.
and some of them will put out their cell phone numbers, and you can literally call them and
Yep.
talk to them because how many people in their district, how many people actually can actually call their their representatives, and I think people should be aware that the representative is, they're there to be able to expedite things. The constituent service, if they have a problem with government, that rep that represents you is there to help make things easier, or to at least guide you into what you need to do. Um, they're there for a reason. They work for you. I know that's like
Mhm.
everyone says, "I work for me," but they do work for you, and you're the one that votes them in, and you should be able to, they're there to represent you, so to fill a purpose that way.
Yeah,
Um,
and they do have resources that and access that we don't have, and they're happy
right.
to facilitate things for
Yeah.
us. Yes.
Yeah. So let me ask you. I'm a bit of a political junkie, but I don't know about Georgia politics as much as I probably should after being here since '95. But now that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for example, decides he's going to run as an independent candidate, because the Democratic Party, in his, according to him, has not given him the right for a debate or to run properly. They've changed the rules a bit, I guess. Um, what happens with the third party candidate in 2024 when you live in the state of Georgia? Can you do a write in on a candidate like that?
So, so two different things.
Yeah.
Uh, there is a process for being put on the ballot as a third party candidate, and
Hmm.
my presumption, I mean, we'll often find a Green Party candidate
Right.
on the
Sure.
ballot for things. So there is a process for that. Write-ins are a whole nother story in Georgia. So I know a lot of people say,
Okay.
I'm just, I'm going to write in my husband, or I'm going to write
Right.
in, my neighbor, or I'm going to
Hmm.
write in whatever. You actually have to register to be a write-in candidate. So
Oh, okay.
the only write-in votes that will count are people who have gone through the process of actually registering to be a write-in candidate. And so
Really? Okay.
if you don't write in one of those people, it's not going to count. So they don't do a
Mm,
tally of all of those,
okay.
Rico, you couldn't get 100 votes, as a write-in because unless you obviously go through
Unless
the
you
process.
register.
But
Right.
yeah, so
Okay.
that notion of sort of I'm just going to write somebody in
Hmm.
Georgia, it's not possible.
Okay.
But
Well,
the different part, you do not have to be just a Republican or a Democrat to show
hmm.
up on the ballot. There are processes for being a registered
Right.
candidate from whatever party it happens to be
Okay.
in.
Does what should a Georgia voter know that we haven't covered that may be trivial or not trivial, but uh, a detail that most people may not know that we should know? I mean, is there anything that we haven't
Um,
gone over?
so I will say that one of the things that I always say about voters is voters are creatures of habit. So if the
Mm,
last election I showed up and voted, in this location, and I voted in that location for the past 3 elections or 10
right.
elections or 20 elections. Don't always presume that things stay the same. We know that we just had, so for example, we know that we just had redistricting because and with the census and numbers have shifted, and so there is a shifting of
Hmm.
precincts and so on. And most of the time, you're going to stay in the same place, but always, again, check to make
Right.
sure that you know where you're, voting. And just because you always voted at,
Right.
Simpson or New H
Hmm.
Building or wherever it might be, don't presume that that's where you voted last time, that's where you're going to vote this time, because sometimes because of the ways that the numbers have shifted, they shift. So again,
Okay.
I think it's
Okay.
really important to always check, even if you think, and
Mm,
I'm pretty involved, and I check my voter page, periodically, and certainly before
sure.
every election, just to make sure that my first of all, my precincts, not just the precinct is the same, but that I know who I'm voting for, because we
That's
know that
right.
there were changes in
Yeah.
congressional seats and House and Senate
Hmm.
races, and even county commission seats. We have a new county commission, situation now from a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And so just knowing where the lines are,
Yeah.
because the lines do
Yeah.
sometimes change. So I think that that's something that particularly coming right off of the redistricting situation that we
Yeah.
had. If you haven't voted recently since the last election, you may find that things have changed a little bit.
Yeah. Makes sense. There's, I know that state House and Senate seats have changed. People have disappeared, or they've been drawn out of a district that they were in. They may be
And
running
the
in a new
lines have just
district.
changed. The numbers have
Right.
changed.
The
The lines
numbers,
have
yeah,
changed.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So really should go to that website that Diane
Yep,
mentioned earlier.
mvp.sos.ga.gov.
Great.
If you just remember MVP, just if you start typing in MVP and
Right.
in Georgia, it'll show up.
Okay.
And that really is, if you remember one thing from this conversation,
Hmm. That's it.
I would say remember that.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is remember that for the upcoming election in Peachtree Corners, you're going to be voting at City Hall.
Right. For 2023. Or for
For
any
2023.
municipal. Yeah. All right, cool. I think we covered quite a bit. We've given places that people can go. Um, is there anything else that you want to share, Diane? Otherwise, I
Um,
think we
I don't think so.
okay.
I think if we want our government and our society to work for us, and we need to be actively engaged with the process. And the League of Women Voters is always happy to give information. I get calls all the time,
Hmm.
emails from friends, neighbors, people across the county asking questions. So if you can always call the county election office. But if I'm a local Peachtree Corners gal. If people are welcome to reach out to me. It's dfisher@lwvga.org, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Cool. If anyone wants to volunteer for the League of Women Voters, they can reach out to you.
Absolutely. We are always looking for new members. As I said, we are relatively new in this iteration,
Hmm.
and we started right in 2019. And just as we got our feet wet and going, COVID happened. And so we are
Right.
eager to engage people who want to do, voter education, voter registration work, helping people. We are nonpartisan. We do not support candidates or, our parties. So we really are just wanting to make sure that people have the information that they need to be able
Hmm.
to exercise their rights.
Excellent. Doing great work. I mean, that's the biggest battle, getting people educated. So, because walking into that booth and not knowing three-quarters of that ballot would be the worst thing to be doing. So I appreciate, Diane, your time with us. We had a little power outage before, so this recording took a little later than it was, and there was not even a storm cloud in the sky, and yet we had a power outage. So go figure. But I appreciate you helping with educating our listeners on this. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. All these links will be in the show notes as well. But do remember MVP. I think if you put MVP elections, it probably pop right up as the first thing on that page. But thanks again, Diane, and appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.